Okay. So, hi everybody. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the Smart Policing Initiative. Most of you have probably heard this introduction before, so I'll get through it as quickly as I can. This is a Smart Policing webinar sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and CNA. Today's topic is on communications. It'll be presented by our very own subject matter expert, Hildy Saizow. Just a few points about logistics. If you need to use the restrooms, they're in the hallway towards the left, just so you know. We record these. I think you all know that since you had to respond to the prompt when you logged in. So this webinar will be available on our website, as are most of our others, when we're done. And as we always do at the close of this, we will send out an evaluation request to everybody who's participating, and we ask that you take a few minutes and give us your direct and honest feedback on this webinar. So that's that. I'd like to make just a couple other quick comments about this particular one that Hildy has put together. We have come to think of process matters in smart policing, things like collaboration, sustainability, and now communications, which we normally think as processes and things that we assume are happening while we're going about our business. We're starting to think of these as outcomes, and we're suggesting that smart policing agencies and agencies that implement smart policing practices should plan for and assess for these process issues like they do for other key SPI components, like utilization of technology or crime analysis or development of intelligence. Collaboration can be an outcome, sustainability can be an outcome, and effective communications can be an outcome that can be assessed. And so with this webinar and others that we presented, we're making the strong suggestion that we start thinking about these processes in a slightly different way. And so this webinar brings the communication issue to the front in a way that we have not done before in the past, and at least not in the way that Hildy approaches it. So having said that, I'm going to turn this over to Hildy and thank her for the work she's put into this. Hildy, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chip, and good morning, everyone, or afternoon to some of you, and welcome to this webinar on effective communication practices. Now, today's topic is a bit different from most smart policing webinars and trainings, as Chip just mentioned, but as we'll discuss over the next hour, effective communication practices are critical if police are to successfully outreach to communities and collaborate with stakeholders. In fact, today's topic is a direct response to feedback we received during some recent roundtable discussions at a smart policing conference. And we asked about the issues and concerns SPI teams were facing. And the most common issue that was identified revolved around communications, or lack thereof, whether it was with key stakeholders like the prosecutor or probation, or with command staff supporting their efforts, or with communities or community leader buy-in, or any number of other individuals and groups that could or should have been involved but weren't. So because this concern was rather pervasive, we decided to tackle it head on. So here we are today talking about issues like brand identity, strategic communications, and collaborative teamwork. I believe you'll find these issues really do hit home, and the techniques being offered today can help propel you and your initiatives to the next level of success that certainly you desire and certainly deserve. So with that, we'll get started. So our agenda over the next 50 minutes or so is to talk about brand identity at both the agency and the project level, communicating more effectively with stakeholders, and, very importantly, effective teamwork in smart policing. We'll also have plenty of time for discussion, so you might want to jot down some questions as we move along so that at various points you can ask those questions or have a discussion among yourselves. So while you may think branding only applies to the for-profit world, think again. This quote from the CEO of Starbucks is wise. Branding in the nonprofit sector is growing rapidly. Think American Cancer Society or American Red Cross, some of the most widely recognized brands in the world. Now, law enforcement agencies can gain tremendous advantage, too, by branding their agencies. So what is a brand? Well, it's much more than a logo and more than a graphic design. A brand is a psychological construct held in the minds of all those aware of the branded product or the organization or the service. So for us in law enforcement, a brand is what our stakeholders or the community thinks and feels about our services or our agency. And if you're not sure what your department's brand is, answer this question and you might uncover it. What do community members and the stakeholders you work with say about you and your agency when you leave the room? Now, based on this definition, a police department's brand is very, very relevant, since it's all about connecting and engaging with the community you serve and the stakeholders you work with. A police department's brand needs to be well thought out, certainly well managed, because it impacts your ability to prevent, control, and to solve problems. So why do I say it has this kind of impact? Well, back in 2001, the Justice Program at George Mason University conducted a study about the image of the police. And here's what they found. The legitimacy of the police depends more on citizens' perceptions of how the police are treating them than on their perceptions of police success in reducing crime. So, just like the Starbucks brand is all about the relationship it has with customers, for police, it's all about their relationships with community members. Now, in reality, a police department becomes a brand the moment officers and staff have contact and engage with community members and their stakeholders. Now, before today, you are probably thinking of brand in the old paradigm, which views branding as a tool for managing external perceptions or image of an organization and is really primarily concerned with communications, fundraising, and marketing. But there is an emerging paradigm that is much, much more important for us in law enforcement. It sees branding in a broader, much more strategic role in an organization's core performance. And in this paradigm, branding is primarily concerned with building operational capacity, galvanizing support, and creating sustainable and enduring partnerships. So let's look at what elements create a strong brand for a police department. They are a brand that expresses an agency's mission, vision, and values, and identifies the true nature of the services and whom they are for. It's a brand that creates an emotional link with stakeholders and the public. This is very important. And a brand that provides a consistent message to all its audiences and of that agency. Now, we can look to the corporate world for examples of some really strong brands, ones that really touch that emotional aspect of their audiences. There's Volvo, which isn't just selling a car, it's selling the safety of families. LL Bean, for example, isn't just selling church shoes and camping equipment. It's selling us a piece of the outdoors and a relationship with the environment. So for police, a really strong brand can and should be validated every day in the actions of the police and the messages they present to the public. So here's an example of a brand created by the Boca Raton Police Department. Now, this department deals with a small resident population, but a quite large visitor population in the winter. In 2008, the department hosted 4 focus groups with community members that represent all these various population groups. And based on the results, it created a brand plan based on a kind of a hip but meaningful acronym, VIPER. Now, VIPER stands for, as you can see, visibility, intelligence, partnership, education, and resources. Now, they go on to define each of these terms, but I think you get the idea. The brand Viper really embraces those elements, particularly mission and vision and others that I just presented. So now that we understand branding in the law enforcement context, let's talk about its relevance to your smart policing initiative. Now, I've reviewed the literature, and I submit the following. Project leaders who embrace a brand mindset will be in a stronger position to achieve their goals. Now, how is the question? Well, here's what you can do. First, identify your project's brand, and then create specific messages for each of your key stakeholder groups. And when creating these messages, you may need to tailor them to the specific audience, but be sure they remain consistent with the project's core purpose and core values. Also, be sure all your SPI team members, whether they be officers, analysts, researchers, or anyone else, be sure they understand that brand, embrace it, and they help in conveying the key messages to your stakeholders. In other words, everyone on the team should be on the same page and moving in the same direction. Now, I'll talk more about this and how to do this effectively when I get to the final section of this webinar on effective teamwork. In addition, you will certainly benefit by working with stakeholders, both internal and external to your department, to seek their input, to get agreement on the overall goals of your initiative, and to earn their buy-in to the brand. Do this early on in your project and all along the way, and you will build a sense of ownership among all involved and your stakeholders' commitment to your success. Now, a good example of an SPI brand is the initiative in Palm Beach, Florida. This site, which focused on community engagement with the Guatemalan immigrant community, connected in an emotional way with their community members from the outset. And the community liaison they hired, the police and community events and videos and community materials they developed, all clearly reflect the brand. Now, you can check out this site and what they did, how they did it, their materials. Perhaps you can connect with the people involved on the site. But you can find all of this information on the Smart Policing website. So please take some time in the future and look that up. Now, most importantly, branding your project helps to build support within and outside your department and get your team the resources, the input, or involvement needed to be successful and sustainable in the long term. Now, let me introduce Stacy Ward from the Reno Police Department, who helps coordinate the Reno Smart Policing Initiative. She's going to talk about what they did in the Reno Smart Policing Initiative, which serves really as a practical example of some of the issues I've just been discussing. So let me turn this over to Stacy for just a couple of minutes. Stacy?
Hi, thank you, Hildy, and thanks everyone for joining into this webinar. I'm just going to give kind of a quick overview of the concepts that Hildy was just describing and the way that we applied them in our SPI program here. So you can go ahead and go to my first slide. So the Reno Police Department's SPI project is focused on the prevention of prescription drug abuse. And so because of the nature of this problem, it's not really one that focuses as much on traditional law enforcement efforts or on the patrol level officers. It's a lot more about community collaboration and in some instances trying to get the different sectors of the community on board with the fact that this is a problem that deserves all of our attention and that we all need to be working on. So because of the nature of that, in our project we've focused a lot more on the external branding within the community rather than internally at the police department. The success of our program, is dependent a lot on getting the stakeholders like the medical community primarily on board with us and collaborating well with us. And so that's where the most the most of the branding that I'm going to be talking about took place. Go ahead and go to the next one. So these were some of the key messages for our different stakeholders, as Hildy was just explaining. They all focus on the same core problem and the same goal of reducing the amount of prescription drug abuse that's going on in our community. We modified the key messages just slightly for each of the stakeholders, as you'll see here, just because of their different role in the problem, their perspective on it, the things that they will be most receptive to hearing, particularly from law enforcement. So, for example, with the pharmacies, the key message that we try to convey is, regardless of the form that the issue of prescription drug abuse takes place, the pharmacies are always involved. So whether it's somebody that has been overprescribed pain medication by a doctor that is just uneducated or negligent in their prescribing practices, whether it's somebody with a more criminal mindset that is intentionally going around and doctor shopping for pills and then either using them and selling them on the street, or if it's a fraudulent prescription case where we have somebody stealing script pads or calling in their own prescriptions. The message to the pharmacies is, while it's not your fault in any of those cases, you're still the last line of defense. Before those drugs go out the door, the nature of the problem is prescription drug abuse after all, and so they are, in almost every instance, being dispensed by a pharmacy. So that's been a little bit easier of a case to make to them, that they are critical in the problem and that they're a sector that we can't ignore, and if we want to make a dent, we have to have the pharmacies working with us. Another one is with the doctors. The key message with the doctors has been slightly different. We've found, and the research has shown, that in the vast majority of cases, doctors are well-meaning. Vast majority of them are not rogue doctors that are running pill mills. They are genuinely concerned for the health of their patients. They tend to err on the side of believing any patient that comes in and complains of pain and is requesting medication because they want to do good. And so we work with that and we encourage that mindset. So we try to communicate to them the best way that you can do good for your patient is to be vigilant and cautious in your prescribing practices and do everything that you can to prevent yourself from being victimized by fraud. And they particularly are receptive to that piece, that if it's a fraud case or a doctor shopping case, it's the doctor that's the victim. And so we as law enforcement are not coming in trying to police you as a doctor. We're coming in trying to help you, and that we can be teammates in this effort. And then with community and parents, it's much more general and simpler of a key message, and that's simply that prescription abuse and prescription overdoses are killing more and more people every year. Some of those deaths have been in our community. And so we all need to be working together to make a difference and to prevent it from even continuing at the rate it is now, much less getting worse in the future. And last slide. And then Hildy talked about the methods that we go about to determine what our key messages are going to be. For us in our project, we really went out and we started making contact right away with these different sectors in the community. And we just talked with them. We got their feedback on what their needs were, where they felt that they could be useful, the areas that they felt that their hands were tied, and they weren't sure what they could do to change their practice or what they could do to make any kind of a difference. And then we just used a lot of that anecdotal feedback to kind of formulate, and we've slightly modified over the years as we get continual feedback, what the key messages need to be for them. And then as far as delivery of those messages, particularly for the medical community, we've held several sponsored training events when we can offer them continuing education credits. That is huge. And so we have about twice a year a training event for pharmacists, and then at least once or twice a year for physicians as well. We've done some newsletter articles. Last year I wrote an article that was sent out in the State of Nevada Medical Board newsletter to all the physicians in the state. We've also done some media outreach and some PSAs with a local coalition that we work with. And then our press releases, particularly when we have an event coming up, like the Prescription Take Back Initiative that's going on nationwide next month. We'll always partner in our press release for that event a little more information about the problem of prescription abuse and what everybody can be doing to help. So that's just a quick overview of our project, and I'll turn it back over to Hildy.
Thank you, Stacy. I think that was a good example of how these concepts I've been talking about are put into practice in smart policing. So let's stop and think for a few minutes and hopefully have a discussion. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions. It can be of me or Stacy, and or make some comments or talk among yourselves a little bit about what you're doing. So just to get you started thinking, how many of you are consciously branding your initiative? In what ways are you branding them? How are you branding it with external stakeholders? Any questions or comments at this point?
Hi, Hildy. Frank Balfa from Glendale, Arizona here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Frank. Go right ahead.
Hi. One of the things that I wanted to comment in regards to the branding, I know that I was pretty fortunate to also get involved in the first SPI grant that we had in Glendale. One of the things that's really critical to the Smart Police Initiative is that regardless of what position you're in, you need to take that methodology and that mindset with you. For example, now I work criminal investigations, so I've taken that branding philosophy and the mindset in regards to working smarter, not harder with me in investigations. And if I can just kind of add that to the group, you need to be consistent and you make sure that you take that work ethic and also that initiative with you, regardless of what section you work within your organization.
Thank you, Frank. That's a good point. How about the rest of you? How are you using branding or thinking about branding? So let's move ahead and talk a little bit more about effective communications, and we'll give you time to think more about what your questions are, and we'll have more opportunities to talk. Okay, let's talk about communication and how we can communicate with each other and our stakeholders much more effectively. Now, oftentimes when we talk, we think we are communicating, but the other person is not really listening, and maybe vice versa. We are not really listening to them. So how do we communicate with meaning and with a strategy in mind so that our overall goals are actually accomplished? Now, just as in branding, things are changing in the communication field. Under the old paradigm, strategic communications involved managing the flow of information, mostly to the media, and typically after the fact it turns to damage control when there's been big problems or emergencies. But now, there's an emerging paradigm in which strategic communications is all about building strong relationships, developing the agency brand, and sustaining long-term and relevant connections to people, communities, and our stakeholder organizations. That's what's relevant for us. Now, I've examined the communications literature and identified 6 key steps for communicating more effectively and with greater results. So we'll go through those 6 steps. Step number 1, understand and, most importantly, embrace your own brand identity. So you may have created a brand, but have you actually told all those around you about it? Does the community understand it? Does your team fully embrace it? Does your team articulate the brand? Does your brand communicate your mission and your values? Clearly link your project to the stakeholders? And does it articulate how the project will actually make a difference? Perhaps impact the community, or maybe even change the world. Step number 2, know who your stakeholders are, or really who can help you meet your mission. Now, too often, we don't really think this through. We either don't include in our work plans some important stakeholders that we should, or we don't communicate the right messages to those stakeholders. In other words, too often we are not strategic with our communication. And so we lose out on important resources and important support that we'll need for success and for sustainability. So it's important for you to consider each of the following stakeholder groups in your work plan. Think about police managers and executives, your command staff. How ought they be involved? and from the outset. Officers in other divisions are a key stakeholder group to consider. How will officers around the department help you in meeting your mission? The SPI team members, and we'll talk more about that as them as a key stakeholder group. Criminal justice agencies. We hear at many of our meetings about problems working with probation, parole, prosecution, correction. They're a very important stakeholder group, and there is a way to work with them effectively. Community organizations and groups. Certainly we need to consider the community that will be impacted by our projects. And government agencies like local governments, a mayor's office, city council members, and service providers out in the community, another important stakeholder group. So once you have your stakeholders identified, think about what benefits they receive by actually engaging with you. Now, from their perspective, what do you need to do to be seen as a valued and trusted partner? That's a very important question. Now, step number 3, create key messages for each of the stakeholders you've identified. Now, these messages should focus really on the big picture, the overall problem that you're addressing, not necessarily the methods for solving it. Initially, people want to know what you are doing and what difference this will make. So to capture a person's attention right off the bat, you need to communicate this kind of information, but in a clear and compelling way and in a relatively quick fashion. So consider creating an elevator pitch that will grasp the stakeholders' rather short attention span. It can be just 2 or 3 sentences that describes your project, says why it's relevant, and appeals to people's needs for both facts and emotion to entice them to want to learn more. Now, this pitch or a short description should really invite a longer conversation that would allow you to say more, but also provide you the opportunity to listen and learn from your different audiences' perspectives. Now, I want to add that there's a lot of information on the Smart Policing website that could help you not only create your brand, but also develop this elevator pitch. Check it out. Search around the site. You will see a lot of general information on smart policing, but also a lot of specific site information too. And from this, you may gain some new ideas and broaden your thinking about how to develop your brand and engage in these steps that I'm talking about. So step number 4, engage with your stakeholders, but especially listen to them. Be genuine and authentic in your wanting to listen to their responses, their issues, and their motivations. Seek out people from your stakeholder groups all the time. Talk with them and share information. Ask a lot of questions of them. Communicate with your key stakeholders frequently. Frequent communication is what creates intimacy that positively influences trust and commitment to your cause and to your project. Now, this communication can come in many different forms. It doesn't always have to be face-to-face communication, or it doesn't always have to involve talking to that person or group. You can start, though, with a face-to-face meeting, probably very important. Maybe focus groups, or even surveys of a specific group in order to gather the information you need to understand them. But over time, it could involve larger, more open meetings, or social media sharing, like blogs or LinkedIn conversations, or even email blasts on a regular basis. Lots of ways to communicate. The point is that you need to do it. Step number 5. Again, it's just as important to engage your team members and get them on board with this approach to strategic communication. Ensure your team members have a clear understanding of the project brand, the stakeholders, the messages, and the methods that you will be using for communicating information. If the team itself is to be effective, all members then have to be on message aligned with the thinking of the leader, and consistent in what messages are delivered to your stakeholder group. Now, step number 6. Now, this step is key and links all the previous steps I've talked about. Now, it recommends that you make every communication relevant from the point of view of the stakeholder. You've got to put yourself in their shoes and look at the situation from their perspective. So with your key stakeholders, share information and stories of what has meaning to them, not what necessarily interests you the most. Be clear why supporting your project confers value back to them. You know, is the value they receive worth the effort to be in this relationship? Now, the research on effective communication is really quite clear. If you do this last step effectively, your stakeholders will become willing and engaged partners. So now it's time to stop and think for a little bit. Maybe you've come up with some questions or comments, but I'll get you started. Does your team listen to those you communicate to? Do some of these steps I've talked about really hit home with you? Is your team open to the idea of tailoring communication to your stakeholders and audiences? Any thoughts? Any questions or comments? And we have a quiet bunch today. All right, well, I'll move ahead, and maybe we'll talk more at the end. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and focus on teamwork, because research indicates that how well teams function has a direct impact on the team's success. Back in 1989, there was pioneering research examining a variety of teams in a range of different environments, such as community action teams, project teams, sports teams, tactical teams, surgical teams, all kinds of teams. The researchers asked this question of all of them: what do those teams that are highly successful have in common? Now, the researchers identified a number of factors that contributed to team success, and that's what I'm going to highlight now, those factors. Now, in previous presentations to smart policing audiences, I defined collaboration as a highly developed process by which multiple agencies and community members work together to address complex issues. But here, we also want to talk about collaboration, but more in the context of teamwork. So we'll define collaboration a bit differently. In this context, it means joining together to make possible that which cannot be done alone. Now, I'll be discussing 7 key features identified in the research I mentioned, and these features may prove useful to you in a variety of ways in assessing your team's effectiveness, identifying your strengths, perhaps your weaknesses, and determining the need to enhance collaboration that perhaps you don't have now. So the first characteristic of highly effective teams is a clear and elevating goal. For your team, do all members clearly understand the goal to be achieved? And is that goal meaningful? Is it inspiring? And if achieved, will it really make a difference? Now, the answers to these questions will, in fact, have an impact on your success. The second characteristic is competent team members. Now, what we mean are members with both technical skills and personal competencies that propel the team to success. Now, there are 4 common features found in truly competent team members. Of course, there's essential skills and abilities, but also a strong desire to contribute to the team, the capacity to collaborate effectively. And by having these other competencies, having a sense of empowerment. Now, another key factor is unified commitment. This reflects a sense of loyalty and dedication to the team. Research found that this is often exhibited by an unrestrained sense of excitement and enthusiasm for the team and its work. A willingness upon the team members to do anything that has to be done to help the team succeed, and an intense identification with the people who are on the team. The fourth key factor is developing a collaborative climate. Now, this is most commonly described in the adage, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is characterized by team members who work well together, who trust one another, and who are consistent, respectful, and sharing. The fifth key factor has to do with standards of excellence and creating those kinds of standards. Now, these standards typically define expectations for level of performance a team deems acceptable. Now, this may involve the type of technical competency that's required, the amount of initiative and effort required, how people are expected to behave with one another, how firm the deadlines are, or even how the results will be achieved. But ultimately, these standards dictate the rewards for success and the consequences for failure. To work, these kind of standards must be clearly articulated to all team members. Now, the sixth key factor concerns principled leadership. Leadership can add tremendous value to any collaborative endeavor, perhaps even that, sense of magic, depending on who that leader is. But principled leaders are those that establish a vision for the future and lift others to embrace that vision. They create that change, and they unleash the energy and talent of contributing members. Now, the final factor that's truly important to effective teams is results-driven structure. So to be successful, a team structure should be designed around the results to be achieved or the performance objectives that you've identified. Now, here are three common structures used. The first one is quite common in police departments, and one in which they're particularly good at, and that's tactical teams. These are teams tasked with executing a well-defined plan. They're typically clear and unambiguous. But the second may not be as common in police departments, although it may describe a smart policing team. The problem resolution team is tasked with resolving problems on an ongoing basis with trust and respecting the critical features. But the third type structure happens much less frequently and should in police departments, but are sometimes considered in smart policing environments. These are creative teams that are tasked with innovating. They're typically given a lot of autonomy, and the members are willing to think outside the box and incubate new ideas. Very important ideas for smart policing. Now, there's four key features of successful team structure. First, clear roles and accountability. An effective communication system is very critical. Monitoring of performance and feedback, and fact-based judgment. Now, perhaps you have all of these, except what we've been talking most about here in this webinar, which is an effective communication system. But without effective communication, all else may suffer. That's really the point. So hopefully, what you have learned during this webinar will help improve your communication systems and the likelihood that your smart policing project will in fact be successful and sustainable in the long term. So with that, let me turn this over to you. Do you have any final thoughts or questions you want to add, or anything you want to ask of the other participants? What are the features that have been key to your team's success?
Hey, Hildy, this is Chip. I'm going to chime in here for a minute, okay?
Okay.
I've been kind of tracking some of the comments in the chat room here while this has been going on, and partially because probably because of a question that I raised in there about identifying people who you listen to most carefully, whether they're supporters or critics. That there are always several people that maybe you pay more attention to than others because they're the bellwethers in your group or your collaboration, and so that has prompted a number of comments about how to find effective partners and shareholders, and making sure that you find the ones that are going to make the best contributions and that kind of thing. And so this brings me back to a theme that has kind of been one of my favorites ever since we started with all this work, which is the need to do branding with inside your own organization as well as to the public and to external stakeholders. Sometimes you have to be successful with your communication and your branding, even amongst yourselves, at least in the early stages of your initiatives. That's what gets people towards, I like to talk about being in the same chapter, not necessarily on the same page. But I'm wondering how others think about that. How much do you find that you actually have to or should be concentrating on this branding, within your own group and your own agency?
Hi, this is Charlie from Sarasota, Florida.
Hi, Charlie.
Hi. As I mentioned earlier, within the past several months, we've gone to this Intelligence to Action program, prompted by the sheriff to bring about a brand or a moniker to what we were doing here. So, the issue's been lately just trying to get the word out agency-wide, first internally, and we're huge SharePoint users here. In fact, probably to the extent that maybe we're too much of a SharePoint user as far as getting our information out. We don't have daily briefings anymore. Everybody gets all their information, on their MDT when they log in. Those are, the people working the road and things like that. But I was wondering if anybody had any real good examples of maybe some of that elevator pitch ideas that Hildy was talking about, because we're really to that point where if we go out and do some community presentations, we get a lot of head nodding and everybody in agreement with it. These are great ideas, some of these initiatives we're putting out there, but the internal buy-in is kind of the bump in the road right now for a lot of us.
Yeah, I don't think we have anybody from Philadelphia on the call today. Philadelphia was one of our early smart policing projects, and they basically, even before they started with smart policing, they went about the process of pretty much rebranding and reorganizing their entire department, top down, in all aspects. And I just remember Nola Joyce, who's the assistant chief there, who's in charge of all this, talking on several occasions about how every time she communicated something to somebody, no matter what the communication vehicle was or who the audience was, she ended up thinking that she should have done it 100 times more. And so I think maybe taking a look at some of the Philadelphia materials on the Smart Policing website, I think there are some really interesting examples of tactics that they have used. And I think Nola did a webinar on sustainability for us, and there's a recording about that too. So when I think about these communication issues, I always go back to Philadelphia as one organization that really, for the past 5 years, has been working intently on rebranding their entire department. And if Nola was on the phone, she would tell you, we haven't been successful yet. It takes a lot of work, but they've given some serious thought to these issues. I'm going to ask David Moss from Palm Beach to talk about this for a couple of minutes, because I know they have been working hard on this for the past couple of years too. Dave, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still, we're here. Hi, Dave Moss from Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. With our initiative, it's extremely important. Our whole relationship is with the immigrant community here, and we've done a number of things to not only put our brand out there, but maintain the image of our brand. Everything from doing public service announcements on radio and TV to ads on bus benches, to one of the centerpieces that we have is we reach out and we do a soccer tournament with the immigrant community, which integrates the sheriff's office, where we actually had soccer teams of deputies also playing along with the migrant community. And something that we're always vigilant to make sure that we don't take a step backwards, I think that no one's really spoken about, is you can also have negative branding just from one or two bad incidents. I know sometimes in our city we have immigration come through which really has no relation to us, but when they do, the community sees all law enforcement as being the same. And as many good things as we do, we can take a step backwards with some unintentional negative branding like that, and that's why we're always putting things out to the community to stay on top of it. It's not something that we just have to do one time. We definitely have to maintain it, Chip.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Would you agree that in some cases there may be some intentional negative branding that you're dealing with?
Possibly, you know, within the agency, like I think Philadelphia, or you were saying, was talking about getting buy-in from the whole organization. You're always going to have some people that maybe not fully agree with the initiative or buy into it, and they might actually do damage that you know, that might be out there that you're always trying to have to cover. We speak to our deputies in roll call, and we also were bringing in people from the Guatemala Maya Center to interact with our deputies before they go out on the road. You know, just to continue to keep that brand within the agency.
Yep. Anybody else?
Frank Balcom here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Frank.
Hey, Chip. When I was talking and I was reading the dialogue that we're doing within the computer, one of the things that I wanted to share is a common theme that continues to come up is the SharePoint. Unfortunately, if we don't manage SharePoint, it becomes the paralysis by analysis syndrome to the point where it's too much information. What do we do? One of the things that we have done in regards, and I think it falls into line in regards to what we're speaking here, is I've identified a dedicated group of shareholders to the point where I know that I cannot send all this information to anybody. And one of the things that I do is work in investigations is I identify my shareholders within the different sectors of the city, and I include them in the email link. And most importantly, I also have a CID email link in regards to we communicate, because most importantly is I want to make sure that we have a consistent message. And Charlie had a message earlier in regards sometimes we don't properly identify our shareholders. Our shareholders is going to be critical for us to make sure that we maintain that communication link. If we don't, then we get into that syndrome of who's reading our information. And that's one of the things that I want to share in regards to. Remember, if we look at the concept of Smart Police Initiative, we need to work a little bit smarter and most importantly identify the people that are going to help us with our brand. Just my few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hildy, have you come across this concept of negative branding?
Not too much. I think that you know, typically it's managing the brand to be on target and to be on message. And I think that where people really go wrong is when they don't initially identify all those stakeholders and they don't see their own department, their own stakeholders within their own department initially as key stakeholders, and what the messages to them ought to be, as well as the external stakeholders and what the messages ought to be to those groups.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical, and to think long term. It's not just what you want tomorrow from these stakeholder groups, it's really what you want down the road and where you want to end up. And, you know, with a successful, sustainable effort, if you're strategic, then you'll get there. You'll get to the end point that you've identified.
Okay, thank you. Let's wrap things up. We've got about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Well, let me just say thank you very much for your attention today. And if you'd like to learn more about branding or strategic communications or effective teamwork, I've provided a whole list of sources which I use and you might find helpful too. You've received this PowerPoint hopefully sometime this morning. So the next 3 slides are these list of sources. And some of these sources will also be on the SPI website. So I wish you the best of luck in your endeavors and hope the information I provided proves useful to you. And of course, I hope that you give my webinar a thumbs up. So have a very good day.
Thank you, Hildy. Thank you very much. Thanks to the folks at CNA for backing up all the technology for this, and of course, thanks to BJA for their support and everything that we're doing here. So, if there's any final thoughts, I'm happy to hear them. Otherwise, let me join Hildy in thanking everybody for joining in today. To remind you to pay attention to your evaluation when it comes along, which will be very soon after this. Thanks, everybody.